circumstances. Eating disorders are, for example, the most deleterious eating disorders, anorexia nervosa, seen not exclusively, but almost exclusively in females of reproductive age. They ain't calories on a menu doing that. That's something you bring into the table. Usually because you have the genetic proclivity for it, and additionally because you've been in a social and cultural circumstance where not only were you the wrong person to get ridiculed for your weight, but also a lot of people ridiculed you for your weight. And then you go all careening off on this path where no one can even tell you you're super skinny anymore because you don't believe it. So the idea that you're going to see much higher prevalence globally in eating disorders from putting menu calorie labels on things is true by this much at the margins, and is just largely not the case.
Adjacent to that is this idea of muscle dysmorphia, which affects a lot of people, but specifically men. Roughly 87% of men that are between 15 to 32 years old that experience muscle dysmorphia, which is what?
So muscle dysmorphia generally is, for whatever level of jacked that you think you are considerably less jacked, both in reference to yourself and your own desires, and in reference to an ethereal make-believe comparator population in your head. So if you were to ask me like, hey, Mike, do you feel jacked? And I'm like, nope. You're like, ooh, not good. Not a good sign. Clearly he's jacked. And then you can ask me, Mike, compared to other 40-year-old Ashkenazi Jewish men, how jacked are you? And if I'm like, I'm probably like bottom 50% for sure, probably bottom 25, you'd be like, okay, he's mentally ill, take him away. That is high-level muscle dysmorphia, a disassociation from any objective reality about how much muscle you actually have.
Do people overestimate or underestimate their appearance as it relates to their muscles?
Dysmorphia is almost always cataloged as an underestimation.
But from your experience working with people, do people think they're more jacked than they actually are?
It really depends on the individual. Most people that are in gym culture, that are very invested, if you catch them on their not so great days, they think they're substantially less jacked than they really are. And if you tease it apart via conversation, they'll end up being like, yeah, no, I know I'm jacked, but I'm just saying like, and then it's aspirational. Like for my goals, I'm not as jacked as I would like to be.
It's interesting because we typically think of women, I think stereotypically in society, as caring more about their body image.
Mm-hmm.
But I've read a lot of stats lately that suggest men care equally about their body image, but just in slightly different ways, and about the correlation between their perception of their body image and their own mental health and the link between the two.
Sure.
Do you see a lot of that? Do you see this link between mental health and male body image?
Yes. Huge proportion of psychological proclivities are genetic. The others are very individually acquired. They change through time. It's not as easy as saying upbringing or family environment. So the one consistent thing about how you relate to the world and your own thoughts is genetics. And a lot of the traits tend to aggregate together. So it is true to say, on a spectrum, very nuanced, that some people aggregate a lot of negative psychological traits and some people aggregate a lot of positives. And they're absolutely people, everyone's a mixed bag somewhere in between, but there's a little bit of this kind of, I don't want to use a term for another mental illness, a bipolarity to the distribution, right? And so a lot of people that are generally neurotic, they feel consistently unsafe and unsure of themselves, are going to be also the type of people that when they get more jacked through lifting, they're still not going to believe that they're as jacked and accomplished and awesome and alpha male as they really are, because they're always like, to use the old Jewish joke stereotype, like, I'm never going to be big. And it's like, you're already big. Like, oh, I don't know. It could get worse tomorrow. And a lot of people just bring that to the table. And so when you get neurotic people jacked, they don't think they're that jacked. They're always like, oh my God, it's always going to end. But if you take not neurotic people and make them jacked, 1 week of lifting into those people, and they're like, dude, do you think I should turn pro in bodybuilding? You're like, get out of here. You're just overconfident. So it really depends on who's doing the thing. Now, cultural stuff, social, who's in your circle. I'll give you a good example. I have a lot of my closest friends have no relation to fitness whatsoever. A bunch of them are actually neuroscientists, just randomly people I knew in college that ended up being my friends for life. And so when they assess their muscularity relative to myself and my bodybuilder friends, they're like, I'm in terrible shape and I'm not remotely jacked. And they have such a weird comparator population that I always remind them, like, dude, not everyone looks like this. They go to the store, they go to school, they go to the bank, and they're like, oh crap, you're right. I'm actually the most jacked person at the bank. It's just not like Gold's Gym where everyone's enormous. So if you happen to be in an environment, let's say you're a university student and you go to the university gym and there's lots of jacked people there and you're there all the time trying to do your best, you may, if you're neurotic to begin with, more neurotic, start to develop a sense that you're just not nearly as jacked as you should be or could be or whatever. But if you like hang out at an old people home with your grandma and grandpa all the time, you're going to feel like Superman all the time because holy shit, you're like, you can do real things and move furniture around.
And so then go back to that point about weight loss. If I'm trying to lose weight, what are the biggest myths around weight loss that hold people back and inhibit them?
One is you have to be perfect. If I'm on my diet, I'm good. If I'm off my diet, not only am I bad, but as soon as I'm off my diet, I have sinned and there is no solace for me. A lot of people have that falling off the bandwagon thing where they'll eat clean food, whatever that means, diet food for weeks and weeks and weeks. They have one kebab, they have one cheeseburger, and they're like, doc it.